Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joseph Brown, and thank you for tuning in today. We have had probably one of the craziest weeks in the markets that we've ever had. There have been dozens of things happening that are absolutely unprecedented, things that have not happened even in 2008, 2009, the Great Depression. We've had unprecedented moves in volatility in the markets, stocks, treasuries. So we have a lot going on. A lot to cover here. I'm going to break it down for you, tell you what it means and what it means for you. And let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is break down everything that the Federal Reserve has announced and unrolled since Monday. I did make a video on Monday of this week. That was the 15th, I believe. And so you can go back. It's the one on my YouTube channel. It's the one that looks like that I'm driving in the car while I'm filming. Ever since then, though, they've done a couple other things here. And basically, in summary, they've rolled out every single program that they had in 2008 to deal with the Great Financial Crisis. And so really at this point, there's no reason to believe that this is just a health crisis and that once the the public health concern goes away, that the market should, be back to normal where it was at, prior to February 19th. They have rolled out all the stops here, basically because they understand that the financial system is crumbling and they're doing everything within their power to not let it. So those programs have been rolled out this week. The first thing that I already talked about in the last video that they did over the weekend was they lowered interest rates. And then following that, they launched a new round of official quantitative easing. They said 700 billion. It's going to be a lot more than that. And included in that, basically, again, quantitative easing I've talked about is debt monetization. They're just accepting debt in exchange for cash. And so that debt that the free market would have sold for a huge discount because it's worthless, because maybe the issuer is insolvent or there's risks of default, the market would price that debt a lot lower, the yield would spike. So the Federal Reserve comes in and it buys that debt, and so it exchanges that debt for basically money. So it's debt monetization, and it doesn't allow the monetary deflation to occur in the economy from debt getting destroyed, specifically bad debt. And so what they did was, obviously treasuries, they're accepting treasuries in exchange for dollars. And obviously, like last time, they're accepting mortgage-backed securities. This time, they're also accepting commercial paper. What that means is corporate loans. And so that's one of the new ones this time that they're accepting through QE from their banks, that they're accepting those corporate loans. One of the reasons why is obviously because we have a giant corporate loan bubble that is starting to implode, and that imploding and popping and all that debt getting wiped out will take down our financial system. And so they're trying to prevent that from happening. So they're buying it all up at the inflated prices in order to monetize that debt. And then they also opened up swap lines with a few foreign central banks in order to allow those treasuries to come back home easier, and so they don't have to go through alternative channels and push down the price of treasuries along the way, which would push up the yields. Because like I said in my last video, and I've said for a while, the government cannot afford for yields to go up because they need lots of new debt right now. Tax revenue is going down, costs going up, they need lots of new debt, they're already running deficits, and so if yields go up, they won't be able to afford that or even afford paying their old debt. And so they need government debt to stay low, so the Federal Reserve prints an infinite amount of money to buy up all of that treasury debt from around the world so it doesn't push the prices down and the yields up. So they opened up these swap channels to make it easier for foreign central banks to get rid of those treasuries in exchange for dollars. The next thing that they unrolled on Tuesday was the CPFF, the Commercial Paper Funding Facility. And remember, commercial paper is corporate loans, it's corporate debt. So your standard big company, Boeing, for example, over the last couple of years, it's issued obscene amounts of very cheap debt. They've used that debt to do share buybacks of their stock. They've given that stock to their managers and their officers as compensation, who have just turned around and sold it. They've locked up, these massive contracts with the government They've been riding high on the hog and delivering subpar at best and broken and dangerous products at worst. And now all of a sudden, the market is starting to price that in, and they've dropped 78% since 1 month ago. And now they're obviously asking for a bailout. And so what this facility is designed to do is it's designed to directly buy corporate paper, commercial paper or corporate loans, even easier than just going through the typical quantitative easing route. And so if you haven't caught the theme yet here, every single one of these programs that they are rolling out is just a way to release newly created dollars into the economy easier and easier and faster. Okay, and then the other thing that they rolled out on Tuesday was the PDCF, the Primary Dealer Credit Facility. And again, it's just another program to allow dollars to go into the economy through their primary dealers even faster. And as opposed to some of the other programs that they have, this one offers a much wider range of collateral that they will accept for those dollars that are being pushed out. And the most significant in there is that they're accepting equities as collateral. Now, there is a condition that if the equities go down in value during the time that they accept the equities as collateral, and then when they're purchased back, that whoever put those securities up, those equities as collateral, would have to pay the difference. But ultimately, just like we've seen for the last 12 years, anytime these things happen, whenever the Fed takes assets, they never give them back. They can't, because their only reason they're taking them is because the market by itself, the free market, would have crushed those equities because they're not actually worth what the Federal Reserve is paying for them. So as soon as they try and release those back into the economy, they'll start to unleash all the damage that they were causing in the first place. And so I don't believe for 1 second that any of this is, they told us 12 years ago that quantitative easing was going to be temporary, and it's going through the moon. There is no end to quantitative easing. There is no end to this debt monetization. They're opening up every channel to say, give us whatever toxic or bad or malinvestment you have, and we'll give you freshly minted US dollars in exchange at a price that is, much higher than what the free market would have priced these things at, just left alone. And so per the actual technicalities of the PDCF, they're not actually purchasing equities outright, because they're just accepting them as collateral for, at a future date, they'll, be purchased back from the Fed. But ultimately, that's not going to happen. So in effect, in practice, they really are buying equities now. And every single time they've, rolled out one of these, it hasn't really stabilized the market. Today, it is Thursday, a couple more hours till the market closes. Markets are up today so far. Right now, the S&P 500 is up almost 2%. Same with the Dow. Russell 2000 is up a little over 5%. And NASDAQ is up almost 4%. Still, though, we're sitting well below even where we bottomed out back in 2018 when the Federal Reserve first started trying to do quantitative tightening before they reversed course and lowered interest rates again. And so this is just, it looks more like a technical bounce than anything. It doesn't really look like a response to the the stimulus, because what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, all these emergency measures, they won't work as stimulus, and they're not designed for stimulus. They're designed to rescue the financial system. They're trying to prevent the financial system from imploding on itself. Now, what the federal government is doing with their, which we'll get into in a minute with the helicopter money, that is designed as stimulus, and I don't think that'll work either, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Two more things that the Federal Reserve has done so far up to this point. The second to last thing, it's the money market mutual fund liquidity facility. And so this is a new facility, a different separate program. They did this back in 2008 as well, in order to make sure that money market funds stay operative, basically, that they don't have a break below the dollar, and that they can continually access dollars directly from the Fed. And so Again, all these things are just designed in order to make it really easy for the Federal Reserve to pump in newly created dollars into the economy wherever it seems like it is needed. And then the last thing that they did was they opened up new swap lines with about 6 other central banks around the world, again, so that they can get those dollars out to the other central banks as fast as possible, so they don't have to go through alternate channels. And pretty much all the major central banks now, except for China. In addition to what the Federal Reserve is doing through monetary policy, the federal government is doing things through fiscal policy, sending direct checks to U.S. citizens, bailing out companies that are distressed during this coronavirus outbreak, getting rid of things like payroll taxes, postponing the tax deadline. The government is basically enacting policies that MMT advocates and Andrew Yang, universal basic income. It's like, all the financial conservative rules have been thrown out the window, and they are just trying literally everything that they can to prevent an apparent collapse from happening. And here's the problem with this. The consequences for incorrect action in business is failure. It doesn't make any sense to say, hey, we're going to bail you out, but because we bailed you out in the future, you're going to be, subject to all these additional regulations, such as you can't do certain stock buybacks or no bonuses over this amount, or we're going to restrict certain officers' pay. No, if these companies want to play stupid games, they win stupid prizes, they fail, they go bankrupt, and then the companies who are healthy, the companies who have done the right actions, that have the assets, they buy all of these other companies' assets. They get all the equipment, they get the infrastructure, they get the people, the employees. They pick these defaulted companies up at fire sale prices, and the overall system then long-term gets stronger because you don't have failing businesses being bailed out to continue their failing practices, and now are even less competitive because they're subject to rules that make them not able to be as competitive as the other companies. And it's going to make them, need a bailout again later on. We've seen this play out over and over the last 12 years, especially during the great financial crisis when companies needed a bailout and then they failed anyway. And so when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And in business, that means when you make the incorrect choices, you fail. The economy is not going to be worse off if certain airlines go bankrupt and then other airlines buy them up at fire sale prices and take more of a market share. Everyone will be better off because those companies operate in a better way. They operate with a, bigger margins or a bigger safety net themselves. They're not operating in the, right on the edge by, using tons of free debt to do stock buybacks that they just give to their officers and their managers as compensation that gets sold and then, implode as soon as the slightest shock hits the system. So in a free market, recessions are the cure for the disease. When you have an economic crisis, which you don't even really have wide-scale economic crises in free markets. These crises are more random and unevenly distributed, and they're not all happening at the same time. But when you have, when you have a central bank and banks that are allowed to operate on the fractional reserve system and create credit out of thin air, then you do create a credit cycle that people call the business cycle, but it's a credit cycle where everything all the malinvestment and misallocation of funds builds up all at the same time and then collapses altogether. But even with that, the recession is the cure. It's what wipes out the malinvestment. It's what destroys the misallocation of funds, and it resets the economy and makes everybody more careful of making sure that they're investing in the right way, because true growth is built on investment. It's built on savings. It's not built on debt. That's fake growth, and it dies. It implodes. And every time you rescue that fake death, you make the system weaker and susceptible to ultimate collapse. That's what happened 10 years ago, and we're probably witnessing the end of the ability for these systems to be bailed out and rescued right now. It's probably not going to work. And ultimately, the longer we delay the inevitable and try this monetary and fiscal stupidity and printing money faster than we've ever seen, blowing up the Fed's balance sheet, blowing up the deficit and the national debt, The longer we keep on going with this, the worse the collapse is going to be, and the more innocent people are going to get hurt along the way. So that's my rant about this stupid monetary and fiscal policy that the government and the Federal Reserve is doing right now. And like I said, ultimately, I don't think it's going to work. We're still going to see the failure and the implosion. It's just going to be more painful because they're not allowing the short-term pain, which is, the recession, it's the chemotherapy, it's what heals the disease, to happen. They're just loading us up with morphine and Novocaine, which is letting the rot build underneath the system for a greater collapse inevitably. Thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. It helps get the video out to more people so that more people can see what's really going on and start preparing for themselves. Really appreciate you guys. Have a great day.